October 14th, 2024. The Harz Mountains, Germany. Two mushroom foragers, Stefan Vogel and his brother Marcus, push through dense undergrowth searching for chanterelles in a region they've walked 100 times before. The morning mist clings to ancient trees, and the forest is silent except for the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves. Then Stefan stops. Something isn't right. Through the moss and decay he sees it. Stone formations that don't belong in nature. Too uniform, too deliberate. The brothers exchange glances and move closer, pulling back decades of overgrowth. What emerges takes their breath away. A concealed entrance carved into the rock face, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The opening is narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Marcus pulls out his phone, turns on the flashlight, and steps inside. The beam cuts through darkness, revealing a chamber that hasn't seen daylight in 80 years. Stone walls, a makeshift table, rusted metal containers, and there, folded carefully on a rock ledge, a Wehrmacht sergeant's uniform, the eagle and swastika still visible beneath the dust. Next to it, a leather satchel containing papers, photographs, and a journal bound in cracked leather. Stefan's hands tremble as he opens the first page. The name written in fading ink, Sergeant Klaus Richter, the 18th of December 1944. Below it, a single line that sends chills down his spine. I have chosen life. May God and Greta forgive me. The brothers scan the chamber with growing disbelief. This isn't a battlefield grave. This isn't a forgotten storage depot. The layout, the positioning of items, the evidence of daily living, it all points to one impossible conclusion. Someone lived here. Someone survived here. And judging by the journal's final entries, someone died here, alone in the darkness, 80 years ago. But who was Klaus Richter? And why would a German sergeant vanish into these mountains just weeks before the war's end? Klaus Richter was born in 1,912 inches, a quiet town near Heidelberg, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and Sundays meant church and family dinners. He married Greta Weber in 1936, a schoolteacher with kind eyes and a sharp mind. Their daughter Anneliese arrived a year later, bringing joy into a world growing darker by the month. Klaus was drafted in 1939, leaving behind his small carpentry business and the family he'd built. By 1944, he was a decorated sergeant, respected by his men, trusted by his officers. He'd survived campaigns in Poland, France, and the brutal Eastern Front. But something changed in late 1943. His letters home shifted. The patriotic tone vanished, replaced by exhaustion and doubt. In one letter to Greta, he wrote, "I no longer know what we're fighting for. I only know what I'm fighting to return to, you and Anneliese." Another letter, dated November 1944, was even darker. "The world has gone mad, and I fear I'm going mad with it." Then came his final letter, received by Greta on December 10th, 1944. The words were carefully chosen, almost like a warning. "If I disappear, know that I chose life over madness. Tell Anneliese her father loved her more than duty, more than honor, more than anything this war demands." 5 days later, December 15th, Klaus failed to return from a routine patrol near the Harz region. His commanding officer filed a missing in action report. 2 soldiers from his unit claimed they'd heard gunfire in the distance, assumed Klaus had been killed by Soviet scouts. No body was recovered. No further investigation was conducted. In a war where thousands died daily, one missing sergeant barely registered. Greta received the official notification in January 1945. Missing, presumed killed in action. She refused to believe it. For years, she kept his letters, his photographs, his tools in the workshop untouched. She never remarried. She waited. Anneliese grew up with stories of a father she barely remembered, a ghost who existed only in her mother's grief and fading memories. Winter 1944. The Third Reich was dying, and everyone knew it. The Eastern Front had collapsed, Allied forces pushed from the west, and German cities burned under relentless bombing campaigns. In barracks and trenches across what remained of Hitler's empire, soldiers whispered what officers refused to admit: the war was lost. But desertion meant death, not just for the soldier but potentially for his family. The regime's message was clear: abandon your post and we'll make your loved ones pay. Mass desertions were happening anyway, though official records would never acknowledge it. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of men simply vanished into the chaos, disappearing into forests, blending into refugee columns, or surrendering to advancing armies. Klaus Richter's unit was stationed near the Harz Mountains in Saxony, a region of dense forest and abandoned mining tunnels. The mountains had become a strange twilight zone, neither fully controlled by German forces nor yet occupied by the Allies. Rumors spread among the soldiers about men who'd walked into those woods and never returned. Not killed, not captured, just gone. Some said they were living like ghosts in the forest, waiting for the war to end. Others claimed they'd been executed by SS patrols hunting deserters. In early December 1944, two soldiers from Klaus's unit, Ernst Weber and Otto Krebs, later recalled conversations with their sergeant. Klaus had become withdrawn, spending hours studying maps of the region. He kept talking about another way. Weber remembered decades later in a 1989 interview. Not surrender, not suicide, just another way to survive. Otto Krebs was more direct. Klaus told me the war would be over in months, maybe weeks. He said dying for a lost cause wasn't courage, it was waste. I agreed with him, but I was too afraid to act. Klaus faced an impossible choice: stay with his unit and likely die in the coming weeks as the front collapsed, or disappear. Survive, but abandon Greta and Anneliese to whatever consequences might follow. The weight of that decision is evident in his final letters, words carefully chosen to sound like goodbye without admitting what he planned to do. On December 15th, during a routine patrol through the forest, Klaus Richter made his choice. He slipped away from his unit during a moment of confusion, vanishing into the Harz Mountains like so many others before him. But unlike most deserters who fled west toward Allied lines, Klaus went deeper into the wilderness. He wasn't running toward something. He was hiding from everything. Klaus's commanding officer filed the missing in action report on December 16, 1944. Standard protocol required a search, but standard protocol had become meaningless in the chaos of Germany's collapse. Resources were depleted. Every available man was needed at the crumbling front lines. A single missing sergeant in a war where divisions were being annihilated daily wasn't worth the effort. No formal search was conducted, no investigation launched. Klaus Richter simply became another name on a growing list of the missing. Greta received the notification in January 1945. The letter was brief, cold, bureaucratic. Sergeant Klaus Richter, missing in action, presumed killed. She refused to accept it. Over the following months, as Germany surrendered and the world descended into post-war chaos, Greta wrote dozens of letters to military offices, Red Cross stations, and prisoner of war camps. Every response was the same: status unknown, no body recovered, no witnesses to his death, no confirmation of capture. By 1946, with millions still unaccounted for across Europe, Klaus became another statistic in the greatest mass disappearance in modern history. In July 1946, 2 years after his disappearance, Klaus Richter was officially declared dead. Greta received a death certificate with no grave location, no remains to bury, just words on paper that told her nothing. But Greta couldn't let go. In the summer of 1947, she traveled to the Harz region herself, leaving Anneliese with her sister. She walked forest trails, questioned locals, visited villages near where Klaus's unit had been stationed. She found nothing. The forest kept its secrets. The locals, exhausted by war and occupation, had their own missing to mourn. One old farmer told her something that stayed with her forever. Many men walked into these woods in 44 and 45. Some came out, most didn't. The forest doesn't give up the dead easily. Greta eventually returned home, defeated but never truly accepting. She kept Klaus's workshop exactly as he'd left it. His tools hung on the wall, his unfinished projects gathered dust. Anneliese grew up in a house haunted by absence, learning to live with a father who existed only in photographs and her mother's stories. The family moved on because they had to, but they never forgot. In 1982, Greta died at age 73, still wearing her wedding ring, still waiting for answers that would never come in her lifetime. She was buried next to an empty grave with Klaus's name on it, a memorial to a man whose fate remained unknown. 38 years later, 2 mushroom foragers would finally give her the answers she'd searched for all those years ago. Within hours of Stefan and Marcus's call to authorities, the site is swarming with forensic teams, historians, and military specialists. What began as a simple discovery by 2 mushroom foragers has become one of the most significant archaeological finds in post-war German history. Dr. Anna Hoffmann, lead forensic archaeologist, arrives on October 15th and immediately realizes this is far more than anyone anticipated. The entrance the brothers found is just the beginning. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team discovers that Klaus Richter didn't just hide in a cave. He built an entire underground compound, 3 connected chambers carved deep into the rock face, concealed perfectly by the natural cave entrance and 80 years of forest growth. The main chamber is roughly 12 feet by 15 feet, with a ceiling high enough to stand in comfortably. The craftsmanship is remarkable. Someone with military engineering knowledge designed this space for long-term survival. There's a ventilation shaft cleverly disguised as a natural rock formation, a water collection system channeling rainfall into a carved basin, and multiple alcoves for storage and sleeping. The second chamber contains what can only be described as a workshop and kitchen area, makeshift furniture built from scavenged wood, a cooking area with ventilation that would disperse smoke to prevent detection. Tool marks on the walls show where shelves were carved directly into stone. The third chamber, smaller and deeper, appears to have been used for storage and possibly as a final refuge if the outer chambers were discovered. The location itself reveals strategic thinking. The compound overlooks a valley with clear sightlines in 3 directions, providing early warning of anyone approaching. Multiple escape routes lead deeper into the forest and toward abandoned mining tunnels. Klaus had chosen his hiding spot with the precision of a soldier who understood terrain and survival. Inside the chambers, the forensic team catalogs items that paint a vivid picture of life in hiding. Wehrmacht rations with expiration dates stamped 1945. Medical supplies, including bandages, antiseptic, and morphine ampules, ammunition for a Kar-9 8K rifle, though no weapon is found. Personal items, a razor, soap, candles, matches carefully preserved in waterproof containers. But it's what they find on the walls of the main chamber that stops everyone cold. Drawings. Crude sketches made with charcoal. Images of children, a boy and a girl, smiling faces rendered with surprising skill. These aren't photographs. These aren't memories of Anneliese. The forensic team estimates these drawings were made sometime in 1945 or 1946, long after Klaus disappeared. The question that haunts everyone at the site, whose children are these? And why would a man hiding alone in the forest spend time drawing pictures of children who weren't his own? The journal is found in the leather satchel wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. Despite 80 years in the damp forest environment, it's remarkably preserved. Dr. Hoffman carefully opens it, revealing pages filled with neat handwriting and fading pencil. The first entry is dated the 18th of December 1944, 3 days after Klaus vanished from his unit. The words are stark. "I have chosen life. May God and Greta forgive me." Over the following pages, Klaus describes his escape with methodical detail. On December 15th, during a night patrol through heavy fog, he faked an injury, clutching his leg and falling behind the group. When his comrades moved ahead, he slipped into the dense undergrowth and waited. Hours later, he heard them calling his name, searching briefly before abandoning the effort. By dawn, he was miles away, moving deeper into the Harz Mountains, with nothing but his rifle, some rations, and a desperate plan to survive until the war ended. His initial entries are full of determination. The war cannot last more than a few months. He writes on December 22nd, "I will wait it out here, then return home. Greta will understand. Anneliese will forgive me." But survival in a German winter forest tests him immediately. He describes hunting rabbits and deer, foraging for roots and berries, stealing potatoes and bread from abandoned farms under cover of darkness. The guilt weighs on him constantly. "Every night I see Anneliese's face," he writes on the 10th of January, 1945. "Does she think I'm dead? Does she cry for me? I am alive, but I am not living." As winter turns to spring, his entries reveal the psychological toll of isolation. He writes about hearing voices in the forest, seeing shadows that might be search parties or SS execution squads hunting deserters. Fear becomes his constant companion. On the 24th of February 1945, he writes, "I heard the guns today. Artillery, distant but getting closer. The front is moving. Soon this will all be over. Soon I can go home." But then comes the 8th of April 1945. The entry is short, devastated. "The war is over. Radio reports say Germany has surrendered. I should feel relief. Instead, I feel terror." The following pages reveal why Klaus didn't simply walk out of the forest when the fighting stopped. He feared prosecution as a deserter. He feared what the occupying forces might do to soldiers found in hiding. Most of all, he feared facing Greta and Anneliese after abandoning them. "I am not free," he writes on April 15th. "The war ended, but my prison remains. How can I return now? How can I explain? They think I'm dead. Perhaps it's better that way." The journal reveals a man trapped not by the forest, but by his own choices, unable to find his way home even when the path was finally clear. The 17th of May, 1945. Klaus's journal entry that day changes everything researchers thought they knew about his story. "I am no longer alone," he writes. "Today I met another ghost." The entry describes Klaus's shock at encountering a man near his compound, a Soviet soldier who'd also been living in the forest since the war's end. His name was Dmitry Volkov, a 8-year-old from Minsk who deserted from the Red Army in the final chaotic weeks of the war. Like Klaus, Dmitry feared what awaited him if he returned home. Stalin's regime showed no mercy to deserters or soldiers who'd allowed themselves to be captured. Going back meant execution or the Gulag. The two men, enemies by nationality, found common ground in their shared exile. They were survivors trapped by choices they couldn't undo. The journal reveals that their initial encounter was tense, both armed, both terrified. But desperation breeds strange alliances. Within days, they were sharing food and extending Klaus's compound to accommodate two. By June 1945, the refuge had grown again. A German corporal named Friedrich Mann arrived, followed weeks later by a Polish man named Jakub, who'd been forced into labor by the Germans and feared retribution from all sides. The compound became something unprecedented, a sanctuary for men caught between worlds, united only by their inability to go home. Klaus writes on June 30th, "We are ghosts of a war that ended but never released us. Friedrich still wears his uniform because it's all he has. Dmitri speaks broken German, I speak broken Russian, and somehow we understand each other. Jakub barely speaks at all. But we survive together." The forensic team's discovery of multiple sets of personal items suddenly makes sense. They find remnants of a Soviet uniform, buttons from a Wehrmacht corporal's tunic, and identification papers for a Polish civilian. The children's drawings on the wall finally have their explanation. In an entry from July 1945, Klaus describes Dmitri showing him photographs of his two children, Anya and Mikhail, left behind in Minsk. He stares at those photos for hours, Klaus writes. Today he asked if I had charcoal. He wants to draw them on the wall so he can see their faces every day. I understand. I would do the same if I had photos of Anneliese. The drawings weren't made by Klaus. They were Dmitri's desperate attempt to keep his children alive in his mind, to maintain some connection to the family he'd abandoned for survival. Autumn 1945 brings changes to the group's dynamics. Klaus's entries describe an uneasy alliance, a survival pact born from necessity rather than friendship. Friedrich struggles with guilt, often talking about his mother in Dresden. Jakub remains withdrawn, damaged by years of forced labor. Dmitri teaches them Russian songs and shares stories of his life before the war. They develop routines, hunting in shifts, maintaining the compound, avoiding detection. But as winter approaches, the entries become sporadic and darker. Food grows scarce. The cold penetrates their underground shelter. Illness becomes a constant threat. On the 12th of March 1946, Klaus writes, "Friedrich developed a fever 3 days ago. Today he can barely stand. We have no medicine, no way to help him. Dmitri and I take turns sitting with him, but we all know how this ends." Friedrich Mann's fate isn't explicitly stated, but subsequent entries make it clear he didn't survive. The forensic team would later discover remains of multiple individuals in the compound, though identification would prove difficult after 80 years. The 8th of June, 1946. Klaus's handwriting in this entry is shaky, the letters uneven. He's writing his final words, and he knows it. "I am sick." The entry begins. "The cough that started 2 weeks ago has worsened. Blood this morning. Dmitri says it's pneumonia, but I think it's tuberculosis." Friedrich had the same symptoms before he died. The journal describes Klaus's deteriorating condition with clinical detachment, as if documenting someone else's death. Fever, night sweats, crushing fatigue. He can barely walk from one chamber to another without stopping to rest. The pages reveal that Dmitri left 3 days earlier. He said he would go for help, find medicine in a village, bring back supplies. We both know he won't return. I don't blame him. Staying here means watching me die, and he's already watched one friend waste away. Better to leave now. Tell himself he tried. Klaus is alone again, dying in the darkness that's been his prison for 18 months. The entries become increasingly raw, stripped of pretense. He writes about Greta and Anneliese with a longing that aches across the decades. "I thought I was choosing life. But life isn't just breath in lungs. Life is home. Life is Greta's hand in mine. Life is Anneliese's laughter. What I chose was survival. And survival without living is just a slower death." He debates trying to walk out of the forest, making one final attempt to reach civilization. But he knows his body can't handle the journey. "I am too weak. I would die on the trail, and at least here I have shelter. At least here I can write these words and hope someone finds them." The final paragraphs are devastating. "To whoever reads this, find my family. Tell them I survived the war, but not my choices. Tell Greta I thought of her every day. Tell Anneliese her father was a coward who loved her. That is my truth. I chose to live, and in doing so, I chose to die alone. Then, almost as an afterthought, Dmitri, if you read this first, burn it. Let them think I died in battle. Let them have that. The journal ends abruptly, mid-sentence, as if Klaus simply lost the strength to continue. The forensic team discovers his remains in the deepest chamber, laid out on a makeshift bed of pine boughs and Wehrmacht blankets. His skeleton shows evidence of respiratory disease. Death would have come slowly, probably in late June or early July 1946. He was 34 years old. Of the others, no trace is found. Dmitri Volkov's fate remains unknown. Did he survive? Did he make it out of the forest? Soviet records from 1946 show no deserter by that name returning or being apprehended, but records from that chaotic period are notoriously incomplete. Friedrich Mann's remains are identified through dental records, confirming he died in the compound. Jakub, the Polish laborer, leaves no trace at all, no identification, no remains beyond what might be fragments in the third chamber. The compound kept 4 men alive for over a year, but in the end, it became a tomb. Klaus Richter survived the war, only to die alone in the darkness, haunted by the family he'd saved himself for but could never return to. The 28th of October 2024. DNA testing confirms what the journal already revealed. The remains in the compound belong to Sergeant Klaus Richter, missing since December 1944, officially dead since 1946, finally found 80 years later. The German Federal Archives and the Heidelberg University Genealogy Department work together to locate living relatives. What they discover is both heartbreaking and miraculous. Anneliese Richter, Klaus's daughter, lived until 2003, dying at age 66 without ever knowing what happened to her father. But she had a daughter. Frieda Richter-Schmidt, age 68, lives in Mannheim, just 30 miles from where Klaus grew up. When investigators contact her, she's skeptical at first. She's heard stories all her life about the grandfather who disappeared in the war, the man her mother spent a lifetime wondering about. But she never expected answers. On November 2nd, Dr. Hoffman sits across from Frieda in a university conference room and shows her the evidence: the journal, the photographs, the DNA results. Frieda's reaction is complex, layered with emotions that don't quite fit together. Shock that he survived the war. Grief that he died alone so soon after. Anger that he never came home when he could have. Relief that there's finally an answer, finally closure for a family mystery that spanned 3 generations. He was 40 miles from home, she says, her voice breaking. 40 miles. My mother was alive. I was born in 1956. He could have known me. Why didn't he come home? Historians analyzing the compound and journal believe the answer lies in psychological trauma and paralyzing fear of judgment. Klaus wasn't physically trapped. He was mentally imprisoned by guilt, shame, and the crushing weight of his choices. Post-war Germany was chaos, but it was also a place of harsh judgment. Deserters were viewed with contempt. The social stigma was intense. Klaus believed, perhaps correctly, that returning would mean prosecution, imprisonment, or at minimum, the complete destruction of his reputation and family's standing in the community. Dr. Hoffman explains. Men like Klaus were caught in an impossible situation. They'd made a choice to survive, but survival came with a cost they couldn't fully understand until it was too late. The war ended, but his war continued inside his mind. The investigation into the other men who lived in the compound produces frustratingly incomplete results. Russian military archives are searched for Dmitri Volkov, but nothing is found. No record of a deserter by that name being captured or returning, no death certificate, no Gulag record. He simply doesn't exist in official documents, which might mean he successfully disappeared into post-war society, or that his real name was never Dmitri Volkov at all. Friedrich Mann's family is located. His sister, now 94, remembers him disappearing near the end of the war. The family received notification he was missing, presumed dead. Learning he survived into 1946 brings her no comfort. He was so close to coming home, she whispers. Just a few more months, and he could have lived. Jakub, the Polish laborer, remains completely unidentified. Evidence at the compound suggests 4 to 6 men may have lived there at various times, some only briefly. None ever officially came forward after the war. Researchers theorize they either died in the forest like Klaus and Friedrich, or they successfully reintegrated into society under false identities. Post-war Germany and Eastern Europe were chaotic enough that disappearing into the masses was possible. For men like Klaus, survival meant choosing invisibility. Coming forward meant risking everything they'd suffered to preserve. Better to be a ghost than face the judgment of a world that would never understand the impossible choices war forced upon them. Klaus Richter's story resists simple categorization. He wasn't a hero who stood against evil. He wasn't a villain who betrayed his duty. He was a man who broke under impossible pressure and made a choice that saved his life while costing him everything that made life worth living. The compound is preserved by the German Historical Society as a memorial site, not to glorify desertion, but to acknowledge a forgotten aspect of war. The men who couldn't continue, who chose survival over duty, and who paid for that choice in ways no one anticipated. On the 15th of December 2024, exactly 80 years after Klaus disappeared, Frida visits the site with her adult children. She carries a box containing photographs of Anneliese at various ages, photos Klaus never saw, a life he missed completely. The forest is quiet, snow beginning to fall. Inside the compound, now carefully excavated and documented, Frida reads from her mother's diaries, journals she'd kept from childhood through her final years. One entry from 1967 stands out. I still believe Papa survived somewhere. I don't know why. I just feel it. Maybe he's living under a different name. Maybe he has a new family. Maybe he's happy. I hope he's happy. The irony crushes Frida. She knew, she says quietly. Somehow she knew he was alive, but she could never find him. The broader context makes Klaus's story even more heartbreaking. Historians estimate that over 100,000 German soldiers deserted during World War II. How many lived like Klaus? How many died alone in forests, caves, and abandoned buildings, unable to return home even after the war ended? The answers are lost to history. Klaus's journal is published in March 2025, edited by Dr. Hoffman with extensive historical commentary. It becomes an immediate sensation, sparking fierce debate across Germany. Veterans organizations are divided. Some condemn Klaus as a coward who abandoned his duty and his family. Others see a man whose conscience couldn't bear the weight of a war he knew was lost and morally bankrupt. One 98-year-old veteran writes an open letter. I fought until the end. I was captured. I came home. I faced the judgment. Klaus Richter chose differently. Who am I to say which choice was right? We all did what we thought we had to do to survive. The children's drawings on the wall, Dimitri's desperate attempt to keep his family alive in his memory, become powerful symbols. They represent what all these men lost: home, family, identity, the future they should have had. On the 8th of May 2025, the 80th anniversary of Germany's surrender, Frida returns to the compound for a private ceremony. She brings 2 wedding rings. The first is Klaus's, found with his remains, tarnished but intact. The second is Greta's, kept by Anneliese, and passed down to Frida. She places them together in a small memorial box installed at the compound entrance. They're together now, she says softly, finally. As she leaves, Frida pauses at the entrance, looking back at the chambers where her grandfather spent his final days. The forest that killed him also preserved his story, kept his words safe for 80 years until someone finally found them. Thank you, she whispers. Unclear whether she's speaking to the forest, to Klaus, or to the two mushroom foragers who refused to leave a mystery unsolved. The forest kept its secret for 80 years. But secrets, like truth, eventually find the light. Klaus Richter chose survival, and survival chose to tell his story long after he was gone. In the end, he made it home after all, carried by words in a journal and the determination of strangers who believed his story mattered. Perhaps that's the real lesson. Not that Klaus's choices were right or wrong, but that every person lost to war, every story buried by history, deserves to be remembered, deserves to be understood, deserves to finally come home. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.